Back, everyone. I'd like to introduce the mobile demand panel. The moderator of this panel is Martin Brock. Martin is Shure's UK Senior Manager of Global Regulatory Policy. He's based in London, and he covers spectrum regulation in the UK, Europe, India, and the US, in addition to global cybersecurity and AI regulatory developments. So with that, Martin, I'll turn it over to you and let you introduce your panel.
Oh, thank you very much, Lee, and good afternoon, everyone. I apologise that I've got audio only, bit of a technical glitch at this end, so despite rehearsals, couldn't make it work today, but glad to be here and to sit with such an esteemed panel. So as Lee said, my name is Martin Brock. I've been with Shure since January 2024. Looking after predominantly program making and special events spectrum policy. Before that, I was at Ofcom, the UK regulator, for 20 years in a mixture of both operational roles and spectrum policy roles. And I'm very, very glad to be joined by Hemant Malik, Tom Sawanabori, and William Webb. I'll introduce them now briefly. So Hemant Malik is the head of technology strategy and portfolio, and responsible for driving a long-term technology strategy and portfolio evolution for Nokia. Tom Sawanabori is CTIA's Senior Vice President and Chief Technology Officer, responsible for technology and technical matters concerning spectrum, network evolution, cybersecurity, and device certification to benefit CTIA's members and to serve as a technical resource to policymakers. And I'm also very happy to have William Webb with us. William's an independent consultant providing advice across all telecommunications matters, and has written some very thought-provoking books in the last few years as well. So I guess that just to frame the discussion before we get into presentations, and the running order will be Tom, William, and Hemant. I guess data traffic and mobile data growth is an issue of forecasts and real data going back 15 years that has really framed a lot of policy or spectrum policy development all around the world, starting at the ITU and working down to regional and national level. So it's incredibly important, and I guess the reason it's important is because these forecasts underpin a lot of decisions by regulators. So you know, we've got the iPhone that will be 20 years old in a couple of years. Feels like a lot longer, but you know, that's where these the kind of genesis of the start of this data growth, so smartphone usage and going up. So with that, without saying much more, Tom, over to you.
Hi, good morning and welcome everybody. Thank you for having me on the panel. It's a pleasure to be here this morning and share with you CTI's perspectives on wireless usage growth in the US. So with that, if you can go to the first slide, I'll share a little bit about what we see in the historical usage demand and the forecast for growth. I'm not seeing the slide advance yet. There we go. As you can see, we've continued to have healthy wireless usage growth over the past decade plus, and you know, as we look forward, according to the Ericsson Mobility Report from late 2024, we anticipate continued healthy growth, and from the period of end of 2023 to 2029, we anticipate a tripling of growth. From about 100 terabytes to over 315. And there's a lot of different factors that are driving that growth. So there's a combination of continued smartphone growth, and the usage on that growth are on smartphones, excuse me, as more and more usage is consumed and higher rates of video. You've got the introduction of more IoT devices and RedCap just coming online now with 5G RedCap devices. Of course, you've got the introduction of fixed wireless access, which has been a big success here in the US, and is tremendous growth both in terms of subscribers, number one, and in terms of usage growth, number two. And then, you know, we're right on the cusp of really exploiting some of the 5G standalone and network slicing use cases that have been identified. And last but not least, I think is something that's of a lot of interest to us, which is AI. And there's, it's not really known what AI will bring to us in terms of consumer applications, business applications, and then use of AI, of course, in the network. But it's anticipated that AI will drive more usage growth, particularly on the uplink. So if you go to the next slide, it kind of highlights some of those areas where AI may cause changes in forecast in demand for usage. Next slide, please. So we're anticipating, based on different forecasts, there's different predictions from Nokia, from Ericsson, and from other mobile experts. The amount of AI traffic is compared to non-AI traffic over the next decade. We expect that there'll be new use cases for consumers to be interacting with AI agents, both in terms of video and other applications. And we think that that'll mostly impact, have a bigger impact on wireless uplink traffic, which will drive more capacity needs as well as more spectrum needs. And then you can see there's a quote there from the CEO of Vodafone, anticipating that cellular networks may be the next AI bottleneck. So we'll certainly see, and we'll be paying close attention to this over the next few years, excuse me. But it's an important area for us to understand and to monitor. If you go to the next slide, it shows a summary of an Accenture report, which CTIA commissioned, was released earlier this year. And it projects from 2025 up through 2030 and out to 2035 that over time, some amount of the usage demand will be unmet. So they're predicting that by the end of 2027, that over 20% of the peak demand won't be able to be met, with average cell capacity. So that doesn't mean that that'll happen every place, but in certain cities, in certain towns, and certain spectrum constrained sites, that potentially over 20% of the peak demand will go unmet. And without more spectrum, by 2035, that number would grow to over 70% of peak demand. So clearly there needs to be things put in place in terms of additional spectrum. We at CTIA are working actively with the administration, the Hill, and other policymakers to try to establish a pipeline of new spectrum, particularly mid-band spectrum. But in the meantime, we continue to work on techniques to add capacity to the networks. If you go to the next slide, it kind of summarizes some of the areas where, while we do need more spectrum, we only have like one new auction that's planned from the Federal Communications Commission, and that's to release inventory that they already have. So we're beyond that, we're building advocacy for a new pipeline of spectrum. But in the meantime, we'll need to do the things that we do each and every day to meet demand, which is to continue to make investments in the network and capacity to build more towers and more sites, densify the networks, and continue to use the more efficient technology. 5G is a more spectrally efficient technology than 4G and the 3G. So we'll be continuing to refarm spectrum in other bands that were utilized for 3G, for example, or maybe 4G, and putting 5G into those spectrum bands to be able to maximize the most efficient technology. So pulling all three of the levers that we know are used for capacity to deliver the most capacity, because, as I said earlier, there really is only one particular auction that's sort of planned right now, and we'll be relying on additional, these existing proven techniques in order to meet the demand. And we'll continue to monitor this, as we continue to grow each and every year, and traffic engineers monitor the usage on their networks on a daily, monthly basis, and plan accordingly. So we'll continue to work hard on this, but we're obviously working on getting new spectrum bands, because it takes years to bring those into market to have an auction or make it otherwise available. Thanks. I guess it's William up next.
Thank you, Tom. I think, yeah, what we'll do is we'll go straight on to William's presentation, if that's all right, William. And
That's fine.
I think any questions from I've got some questions of my own afterwards, but I think if we gather them all up and do them in the panel session afterwards, it should make for a little bit more of a cohesive panel session. So over to you, William. Thank you.
Thanks, Martin. Morning, everyone, and delighted to be presenting to you today. So what I'm going to talk about is actually the subject of a book I published last year. You can see it there, The End of Telecoms History. And that book obviously has a lot more detail and a lot more sort of evidence base than I'm going to present in the next few minutes. So if you need to plow into what I'm talking about, there's a substantial chunk of information available there. Can we go to the next slide, please? So my observation that led to me writing the book is that since really about 2013, it's been fairly clear that the growth or the usage of mobile data is following an S-shaped adoption curve. You can see the curve down at the bottom there. It's a classic thing that we see for consumer applications. Consumers tend to be, you have the early adopters, then the mass market, and then the sort of laggards at the end of it, leading to a typical S-curve. And if you plot the annual growth rates that you would expect to see for an S-shaped curve, you get a straight line in terms of the growth declining over time once you pass the midpoint of that curve. And that's exactly what we see. So if you look at the top left chart, this is global data that I've assembled from a range of different sources. And what you see is the solid black line is the actual data that is available. So it's a reasonably straight line. There's a slight upward peak in 2020 that relates to COVID. Other than that, it's followed pretty much the trend line that in fact I predicted back in 2016. And what you see is a linear decline of around about 5% a year. So every year, the growth rates drop by 5%. Now, clearly we're still growing, but that rate of growth is declining substantially. And if you simply extrapolate that, we're at 15% now, then you get to 0 in 2027. So it suggests that we'd reach a plateau, which is exactly what you'd expect from an S-shaped growth curve. And indeed, all the data that I've seen published in the last few months aligns with this, or indeed shows a steeper fall. So Ofcom published 7% annual growth rate last year. Germany have just published 5% annual growth rate. So numbers that are actually below this. For the EU, we've seen 15%. So this data, I think, is pretty incontrovertible. The question really is, what happens beyond 2024? Do we carry on along this line, or do we move to a different trajectory? Could I have the next slide, please? So if we look at a number of different countries, you actually see the same thing pretty much everywhere. They're all going down. Some of the biggest countries in the world are going down quite quickly. China and India dropping really quite precipitously. North America is a slightly different kettle of fish, and maybe we can get into some more detail, but essentially the reason that we're seeing higher growth rates at the moment in North America is the number of fixed wireless access subscribers that Tom mentioned that are moving onto the network, which is great news. And of course that leads to substantial growth because each new fixed wireless access subscriber that you get uses something like 20 to 30 times the data of a mobile subscriber. So you see a substantial increase there. What I've actually done is worked out the underlying growth rates. If you remove fixed wireless access subscribers and just look at mobile subscribers, it's about 10 to 12% in America at the moment and falling. So again, very much in line with the rest of the world. And then the question is, what's going to happen around fixed wireless access? And what we see at the moment is companies like T-Mobile saying there's a peak of, in their case, of about 8 million subscribers. And analysts like New Street have worked out what that means for the totality of the industry. And it looks like we're going to see fixed wireless access subscribers probably peak at about 16 million. We're about 12 million now, so we're getting close to the peak. If you factor that in and that plateau, then what you see is actually the American growth numbers follow all the other growth numbers and tend towards 0 by about 2028, something like that. Next slide, please. So why is this happening? Well, it's pretty straightforward, actually. Almost all traffic is video. Something like 80% of traffic is video. That's expected to grow even more so. And essentially, there's only so much video we can watch. Once we're watching video 24 hours a day, we can't watch any more. And in practice, of course, it's much less than 24 hours. So we're seeing people get to the point where they're satiated with video. And indeed, actually, we're also seeing video bandwidth falling. So over the last 8 years, video codecs have improved such that video data rates are only about 60% now of what they were 8 years ago. So that downward trend on compression is actually likely to push us down somewhat on the overall video traffic. And if we look at things like VR, for example, that's video. It would likely displace watching video. It's higher rate video than other videos, but nevertheless, it's essentially a video displacement activity. So that makes perfect sense in terms of what we're seeing in the marketplace today. Next slide, please. So could anything change that? Well, Tom has set out a case for what could change it. And of course, everyone will have their views as to what might happen over the coming few years. My take is actually it's unlikely. We've seen no significant change in the last 10 years. We've seen that downward trajectory grow. And if we take a look at any of the applications, they don't really move the dial. So things like Internet of Things, the volume of traffic generated by Internet of Things at the moment is about 0.03% of network traffic. So it's great stuff, but it's a trivial amount. Tom mentioned AI. My view is AI doesn't generate much network traffic, and I've seen a number of reports on that from a range of analysts like Analysis Masons. It generates a lot of traffic between data centers, but on the access network, very little, because essentially we send a query to ChatGPT or we upload a picture or some video. But of course, we're already uploading lots of pictures and videos. It's what we do all the time. We take pictures and send them to the cloud. We take video and send it to TikTok. So it's not really changing very much. It's only probably displacing the activity that we would have done otherwise. And certainly, we don't see any increase at all at the moment from AI in terms of access network traffic, or at least nothing significant. So I think it requires a bit more substantiation than just it might make stuff grow, and I don't see the argument there moving forwards. Next slide, please. So I don't want to sound like a doom monger. I think this is actually a great story. I think that the story is actually one of now delivering to end users everything that they actually want, which is a fantastic achievement. An end user that has fiber to the home or even fiber to the cabinet that has a good 4G signal delivering 10 or 20 megabits a second actually has everything that they need. There's no application that can't run on those kinds of systems at its full potential, and they're not constrained in any way by capacity. So it feels to me like we've achieved something really substantial and amazing. We just need to make sure that's ubiquitous now, and I think that's the key challenge, to ensure that there is really good coverage everywhere, really good broadband facilities everywhere, and it's easy to use, and it's economic and cheap for the end users. And that's me done. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, William. Hemant, do you have slides?
Yep, I have slides. Ship them to you if you can make.
Yeah, one moment, and I'll pull them up.
Okay. So, thanks for having me on this panel. It's a pleasure to be here, and good morning, everyone. I'm going to present, I think, in next 10 to 12 minutes, is a global network traffic report. We do it annually, and it's done by our Bell Labs consulting organization, which is a consulting piece out of overall Bell Labs based in New Jersey, and they consult different industry players, including our customers, on various things. So this is a traffic report we do every year, sometime around summer, and the timing of this conference is that probably a couple of months now the new report will come in, but I think maybe sometime later I can come and present that. Next slide, please. So I think we present the traffic forecast around 4 categories: consumer, seller, fixed, enterprise, office enterprise, and industrial enterprise. Next slide, please. And what we do is, I think we take into consideration a lot of scientific data. We look at the macroeconomic environment, we look at the technology advancements, we look at the adoption and penetration of the telecom technologies, access, or for that matter, other technologies which impact the traffic. And then we actually analyze the change in consumer behavior. So all that aggregates into the traffic forecast that we share with the industry. And all these factors, without going into much detail, have a positive or negative impact. So based upon any changes in these factors across these 4 segments, I think the traffic forecast is liable to change. Next slide, please. So this is what we are forecasting. I think we said this in sometime summer 2024. I guess we see traffic growth depending upon which scenario you have. So we come out across 3 scenarios. We say moderate, aggressive, and disruptive. And it's actually based upon a combination of the factors in the last slide that I shared with you. So in the moderate scenario, if you see, we see somewhere around 18%. And going all the way to disruptive is 27%. Without going into much detail, I think the main differentiator between moderate going all the way to disruptive is the adoption of AR or XR as a technology. And in midway between moderate to aggressive is the application and usage of AI. I'm going to talk about separately on the AI piece of the traffic, how we see AI is going to contribute to the traffic growth. But if you see a percentage between consumer, cellular, fixed, and enterprise, I think on the lower left corner of the slide, if that is visible, I think between moderate scenario from 2023 to 2033 in 10 years, so cellular is going to go from 19.9 to 21.5%. And likewise, the fixed traffic are going to come down, but the enterprise, both in industry verticals as well as office traffic, is going to grow. I think another differentiator which I would like to highlight between disruptive, aggressive, and moderate is, if you look at the top right corner, is the contribution of AR, VR, and AI, and that both will impact actually the industrial and enterprise traffic as well. So if you see in moderate, the video traffic is more than 50%, and that is coming down as we move from moderate towards disruptive traffic. So I think between these 3 scenarios, a CAGR of 18% to 27%, and then it will depend upon how the adoption of various end user services like AR, VR, and the technology like AI and spatial computing, that adoption of that. So next slide, please. And a similar chart, I think on the global fixed traffic continues, it will have actually more growth than the total traffic. If you see a CAGR from 18% actually starting to 27%, video traffic still remains predominant, but then the enterprise traffic, fixed enterprise traffic, that also we see a healthy growth in it. Next slide, please. I think this is an important one, and I wanted to spend some time on it. We have been evaluating how AI is going to impact the overall traffic. So there are 2 ways in which the AI is going to impact. One is the direct AI traffic, wherein we call in the applications, the AI applications, whether video generation, image generation, the generative AI in general, or using post creating AI platforms. Then it could be AI assisted shopping and gaming and etc. etc. So these are the direct AI applications which we see rise in adoption actually starting a couple of years back. Then there is going to be an indirect AI traffic. What is indirect AI traffic? That is impact and growth of traffic when AI will make it more contextual and meaningful and personal. For example, video. So AI will know the persona, AI will know the patterns, AI will know the consumer behavior up to the details of what time in a day, what is the preference. So it's gonna is gonna, bring about the content which is much more relevant to the user, and it's gonna probably increase the consumption. And not only on the video, that is going to be in the shopping, that is going to be in the browsing and other categories as well. So AI is going to influence people to consume more content. So these both will contribute to the growth in the traffic, and AI traffic, how we see is it's going to be over and above the existing traffic. It's going to be a new segment of the traffic which we haven't seen so far. So next slide, please. And this is where it is. We have kind of, compiled everything into a single slide. On top, you see the orange and magenta, a huge growth, and that is the consumer AI direct and enterprise WAN AI traffic, CAGR of 51%. And that's a new segment of the traffic, which was never before. And if you see from the left-hand side, it started to grow from 2024 and all the way to 2023. And the other rest of the traffic, whether non-AI, which is consumer regular or enterprise WAN regular, that we will see the moderate growth, which we forecasted right previously as well, somewhere from 18% all the way up to 27%. But this is a moderate scenario, so we take the lower side of the growth. And this is actually on the access side, the WAN side of the network. I would like to include a phenomena. What will be the impact of this traffic, whatever growth we are seeing, including the AI, in the overall network? So next slide, please. Yeah, so we looked at, we broke down the network and we looked at the various use cases of AI for that matter. There are going to be inferencing applications, there are going to be learning applications, and the implementation of inferencing for this particular study is it will be distributed going centrally all the way up to end. And this is being fueled by a couple of phenomena. One is, the diffusion of AI. The models are becoming, from the transformational models are becoming smaller, micro, or going from all the way, 70 billion parameters coming to less than 5 billion parameters, which is actually being supported by the equal growth in the capability of the end devices. The NPUs, for example, which go into mobile phones, I think the way in last 15 months their capability has increased is actually twice X. It's not 18 or 24 months, it's 15 months. I think now we talk about any of the NPUs you pick up are tops of around 45. So what it's gonna do is this to and fro between the central location all the way to the edge, as well as somewhere in the device, is gonna increase the traffic on the data center links, whether it is a metro edge or whether it is a metro core or whether it's a central core. Thank you. So that is what I wanted to share with you, is that for each X increase of access WAN traffic, there is going to be at least 3x increase in the inter data center traffic. And for this matter, even the edge we are considering as an edge data center. So access towards the core and edge of the network, and including the inter data center, there's going to be huge traffic increase, and we are seeing 73% of this demand will come, at least from the CSP, 73% increase in CSP transport traffic. So this is another phenomena which will probably require upgradation of the transport side of the network as well. So this is in short and sweet. I wanted to share. There's a full report on this, which is published on our web also. And if any questions, I'm happy to share. And thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Hemant. Thank you very much, Hemant. So I'll come on to some of the network questions in a moment, but I wanted to come back to something that I think William picked up on earlier. So mobile use, I mean, it's transformed modern day or modern life. There's no getting around it. And I think what your last slide, William, which picked up on something to be celebrated. It's a success story, and actually what we're talking about is providing coverage and that usability to the general public at the end of the day. But you mentioned fixed wireless access, and this has also been a success story. I've picked up on many headlines in the States. So it's a question for Tom, actually. So we've heard William mention fixed wireless access and stripping out FWA from some of the data traffic stats. Is FWA something that distorts the network traffic statistics, and does it blunt the argument put forward somewhat by mobile networks that they're short of capacity? I mean, sort of bearing in mind that the average user could use 20 times or 30 times the data or FWA. So over to you, Tom, for an opener. I think are you still on mute, Tom?
Yeah, thank you for the question. As I mentioned earlier, fixed wireless access is part of the traffic that we're actually monitoring and measuring. We've had tremendous success in the growth of fixed wireless access subscribers. Publicly available data shows that the number of customers on fixed wireless access in the U.S. has grown from 850,000 from the end of 2021 to over 4 million end of 22. 8 million by the end of 2023, and nearly 12 million, 11.8 to be more precise, by the end of last year. Those projections those statistics actually track with those that we're tracking here at CTIA. And a Fitch report that I recently reviewed projects it could go as high as 20 million by 2028. So we'll see, I think we expect a continued growth of fixed wireless access customers and fixed wireless access usage, which as you mentioned, Martin, can be significant. It's part of the network demand that we're serving. So we really don't break it out separately. It's part of the architecture of the overall network, which is the beauty of it. You're using fiber backhaul, you're bringing a site into a particular neighborhood or community, and you're delivering fixed wireless access using one or more spectrum bands. So it is actually wireless usage. Of course, most of that usage is not as mobile as traffic that's on the freeways or in vehicles and so forth, but it is real network traffic and real network usage. So I think it's still an important part of our growth. We're factoring in what sort of the projections are, and then being realistic about, that will probably slow at some point, but we're factoring in fixed wireless access traffic into our overall usage projections.
Okay, thanks, Tom. I noticed that President Trump had his one big beautiful bill announcement about the draft US budget being discussed by the House Budget Committee. And he's asked FCC and NTIA on behalf of, I guess, federal users to find 600 megahertz of spectrum. And this is all sort of mid-band and up. I think it was 3.1 up, with the number of bands kind of, I think, below 3.45 excluded. But we're looking at spectrum now for 6G that's kind of in the 4 gigs up to 7 and 8 gigs ranges. I noticed that in, I think, all presentations, there was this discussion of global data. But again, I think you mentioned in your presentation, Tom, that what we tend to examine is a capacity problem, and that could be highly localized or in a particular time and a particular location. So is there room, I mean, this is a question for William, do you think there's room for a more kind of granular approach in terms of how regulators and spectrum users look at spectrum? given that as you move higher up the frequency ranges, the potential to kind of use spectrum in a more localized way increases.
Yes, I think absolutely that's the case. And obviously we've seen what happens at one far extreme with the millimeter wave spectrum. It was used in the US only in very dense urban areas, and it's been given back elsewhere. Same is true in many other countries as well. So if you go way up the frequency range, then you end up with something that's used in only very small areas. And clearly it's a continuum. So 7 gigahertz is nowhere near as bad as 26 or 28 gigahertz, but it's still a substantial chunk of the way from 700 megahertz, where the really good coverage exists, up to 23 gigahertz or 26 gigahertz. And it seems likely that those kind of frequencies would be used only in the densest areas, because the range is just not there for other areas. So you would expect something that's perhaps a bit more granular, maybe a bit more in the way of spectrum sharing. Maybe that actually helps get along with the incumbent users by effectively only needing the spectrum in areas where perhaps they won't be using it. So that may be a good story. So I think going forwards, as we move up the frequency band, the concept of more localized type spectrum release will come more to the fore. And I think there's many ways that can be done. We've seen a whole load of different approaches with things like CBRS and databases and other things like that have shown themselves to be very workable in the future.
Thanks for that. And that brings me on to the technology side. So if Hemant's on, I was going to ask kind of a related question, but more on the technology side, which you mentioned that there's, it's really about, it's a matter of network capacity expansion. So is there anything in terms of technology advancements on, the vendors are looking at that really could eke more capacity out of the networks? Or the point I'm making, I guess, is more spectrum always the answer, or can you still is there potential to still do something in terms of the technological advances?
Yeah, so I think thanks for the question, very relevant one. There will be technology advancements, of course, across all the spectrum, not only in the capacity, but coverage, energy efficiency, and operational efficiency. I mean, what we anticipate is, of course, there is going to be more spectrum needed, but let's say the technologies like, extreme massive MIMO, that's going to increase capacity efficiency to the tune of 10x as well. Likewise, new link level innovations, they can increase the coverage up to 10 dB coverage on the new bands. And similarly, extreme sleep mode and some other AI capabilities is going to increase energy efficiency, 10x lower energy efficiency. That's something we forecast. I mean, it's going to be a calculation, but I'm gonna share with you the high level numbers which we can see. And then of course similarly on the operational efficiency, if we bring in the AI native into the network as well as in the network operations, I think it's gonna enhance the performance, which will probably add to the capacity and coverage efficiency as well, and also it's gonna reduce the OPEX. So absolutely. Technology advancement, including the AI going natively into the network, that is going to help in increasing capacity efficiency. So it's going to be a combination of spectrum and the technology advancement. I think in short, I think that's something I would like to share. But of course, there's a lot of details behind it, which probably we don't have much time to discuss. Yeah.
That's okay. Thanks, Hemant. Just staying with you, Hemant, for a minute, and then I'll come back to Tom. Actually, there's a lot of talk about 6G. We're probably looking at early 2030s, perhaps 2031, before we start to see any deployments from what I've read. And I appreciate I'm a kind of an outside observer in all this, but take a keen interest. What do you think, Hemant, is the main differentiating factors between 5G and 6G? As an end user, what differences am I going to see in terms of the applications and what I can do on a phone, for example?
Yeah, so I think it's going to be multifaceted. 6G as a technology, of course, it's going to bring more efficiency, more capacity, low latency, and the way our industry, technology industry is moving, and what we see happening in the technology domain is dependence on connectivity more and more. I think the connectivity is evolving from the way we are towards a concept called hyperconnectivity, wherein many of I would say lifestyle enabling applications will depend on connectivity. And by saying that, I mean even in healthcare, even in augmenting human capabilities, whether it is across cognition, skills, physical strength, etc. So we will see adoption of technology which impacts those aspects of human life, and that's where 6G plays a very important role. Some of the highlights we all know. It's going to be ISAC, and beyond that it's going to be ubiquity. Beyond that it's going to be integration with NTN, and beyond that it's going to be the lower latency as well as much higher capacity. So these are some early technology advancements, and commensurate to that, I think I would like to comment a little bit on the spectrum also. What we see is most global regions will get a new spectrum around 7 gigahertz, which is positive for 6G, and many leading markets we'll look across the globe, correct? We'll have somewhere between 900 to 1400 megahertz new spectrum, which will allow 300 to 450 megahertz per operator, assuming 3 operators in a market. So the technology, the capability, and if it's clubbed with this type of spectrum, I think 6G is gonna address the needs from the network, whether it is latency, whether it is capacity, whether it is uplink capacity, or whether it is ubiquity and hyperconnectivity, with a combination of technology as well as the availability of spectrum.
Thank you, Hemant. So that tees me up nicely. So Tom, you've been waiting patiently. I mean, looking at the bands for 6G, Hemant mentioned there that there's some. I mean, it's the subject of Agenda Item 1.7 at WRC 27, which is largely satellite dominated WRC by the looks of it, but there is again the perennial allocations for IMT. So looking at the bands targeted for 6G, is spectrum sharing by mobile networks a more viable option, or do you still have your heart set on exclusive licenses for mobile? And I note that the Ofcom in the UK has proposed a rather interesting split between Wi-Fi and IMT, so this kind of variable spectrum split where it doesn't necessarily have to back a horse, so to speak, and it kind of sees how both technologies develop in terms of who can deploy in the spectrum sooner to basically make more use of the spectrum. So does it have to be a winner takes all, or is there some sort of, in your view, more granular approaches to spectrum management that can be adopted?
Yeah, thanks for the question. And let me first address one point you made earlier about the 600 megahertz that the administration is pushing for in the U.S. And we're support of a mid-band pipeline of spectrum bands, including the lower 3 gigahertz band, the upper C band, the 4 gigahertz band, as well as the 7-8 gigahertz band, sort of in that mid-band range. And then, of course, the FCC has had a proceeding on 13 gigahertz as well, which may be more suitable for 6G. I also want to just mention, in addition to the things that Hemant mentioned, we're monitoring the continued evolution of massive MIMO into what some call giga-MIMO, right? As you approach these higher bands, to be able to utilize the network's topology as it's been built, right, and not have to densify by 2 or 3 times as many sites. We're looking at higher order MIMO technology. So that's one of the technologies that we're monitoring as technology evolves, and as 6G is as we get closer to the end of the decade, to be able to utilize them. In terms of your question with regard to preferences for spectrum, our first preference is for full power exclusive use spectrum, and then secondly, sort of sharing, coordination, using proven techniques that we've done in the past, which is like geographic coordination or time-based. We're also monitoring what's going on in the UK with Ofcom's efforts, as well as those in Europe, where they're looking at what they call like hybrid sharing, right? There's a consultation out considering hybrid sharing between Wi-Fi indoors and licensed spectrum. There's sort of two models, right? One is outdoor indoor, and the other one is more of a spectrum split. So
that's right. Yes. I think Ofcom expressed a preference for the latter, didn't they? I think the indoor-outdoor thing was looking like a bit too difficult to implement, from what I could read.
Yeah, I think there's some technical challenges with some coordinating all that indoor to outdoor technology implementation, but we are definitely monitoring some of those developments and are interested in how they might proceed and the implications for global spectrum harmonization as we go forward. So I think there's definitely some opportunities. As you mentioned, it looks like it's moving more towards a spectrum split opportunity, but we'll keep our ears to the ground and happy to hear from you and others how that may progress.
I'm just wondering, William, if you had any thoughts on it's just going back to data I see that measures global data growth, and I was in India back in November, and that is a country that doesn't necessarily have a lot of fixed infrastructure for backhaul. So, you've got. It strikes me that you've got spectrum regulations and allocations that are made on a global level, or certainly a regional level, for economies of scale for manufacturers. But when you actually deal with data growth, it's applied really at a national level. It can have great national variances. I mean, do you think? I mean, you've been a regulator too, because we overlapped at Ofcom. Do you think that there's potential to have a fresh look at how kind of mobile data growth is recorded and reported? Because you've got the forecast that Tom's put up, but you've got your forecast. It strikes me again as someone outside that world that you can't both be right. So is there a way to kind of have it so that this data is consistently gathered and measured and recorded to inform that regional and international policy making?
Yeah, so first of all, absolutely, it would be really helpful if there were clear or authoritative sources of data growth, and some countries do. So Ofcom is great. Every quarter it publishes absolute volumes of data openly, and you can look at that data and you can see exactly what's going on. And there are a few other countries like that. The US doesn't do that, as far as I'm aware. I don't think there's any sort of independent or regulatory reporting of data. I know, Tom, you have the figures that you've put forward, and those are helpful. But it would be great if there were every country, let's say every regulator, every quarter put out authoritative data on this. I think it would be helpful. I mean, in terms of differences, yes, there's huge differences. So in India, as you rightly say, there's far less broadband, and so what you see is mobile data usage is about, I think from the top of my head, 26, 28 gigabytes a month, whereas in China it's about 16, in Germany it's about 7, and that reflects the amount of home broadband and other factors. But interestingly, all those countries are all following exactly the same trajectory of a plateauing of data usage. So it suggests that they're all going to hit a flat level of growth or zero growth at about the same time. It's just a different overall level of growth that they'll see going forwards. So actually, on a global basis, I think that in fact, there's reasonable alignment if you look at those growth rates. You mentioned the forecast and how can we be aligned. The one thing I'll say is I made my forecast in 2016. It has been absolutely spot on ever since, within about 5% of global trend ever since 2016. Ericsson, for example, have revised down their forecast every 6 months for the last 3 years and continue to do so. Tom, the latest figures from Ericsson are 2.2x growth, not 3x growth now for North America. And I have no doubt they'll continue to do that. I haven't looked at some of the other forecasts, but it does feel to me that track records want to speak for themselves.
Yeah, thanks, William. I want to come back to Tom on that. So, what we're it's often pointed out that the percentage growth is kind of an odd metric. You're still talking about, okay, so the percentage of growth is declining, but it's still growth, and it's still a percentage of a very, very large number.
That's exactly the point. Yes.
Yeah, so I know Stefan Zeller from Colliago was meant to be on, so I'm trying to fill his place a little bit and be even-handed in the arguments. But coming back to the physical characteristics of some of the spectrum we're discussing now, as you go up past midband, and that's even before you get to the millimeter wave at 26 gigs up. Yeah, from a mobile network operator standpoint, are there limits or hard limits in terms of what spectrum networks can viably use at a cost that mobile networks are happy with? And I'm talking about the kind of infrastructure investment that would be needed to make use, or to make sure that these higher frequencies work in terms of propagation, for example.
Yeah, it's definitely more challenging as you move upwards. For example, into the millimeter wave area, you clearly have shorter propagation in the order of a few hundred meters, right? As opposed to much longer distances with mid bands or low bands. That can be effectively utilized for certain use cases in very busy venues like stadiums or other scenarios where high traffic areas. I think it's been utilized in some of the areas where fixed wireless access is being provided, because you get the wide bandwidths, and you've got, as long as you can get a site into a nearby neighborhood, that can be utilized solely as the fixed wireless solution or in conjunction with other bands. So I think it's, as you go higher up in frequency, you will see some use of the spectrum, which might be more localized than other low bands or mid bands. But clearly, we'll look for technology to improve in terms of the gains we get out of antennas, as well as other things that are even farther out there in terms of technology improvements like reflectors and other capabilities, which are probably a little bit more on the horizon, but are still in research and development.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. So, and a question for all of you, I suppose. So spectrum users, particularly when you get to ITU, they kind of protect their turf quite fiercely. I mean, we tend to talk about different services as competitors, so it's mobile, or it's satellite, or it's with direct to device, for example, and with WRC coming up being a very satellite centric WRC. I mean, I've noticed that a lot of the initiatives on direct to device, for example, involve satellite partnerships with mobile networks using spectrum allocated to mobile. So, I don't know if any of you want to jump in, but my question was, are there any thoughts as to how these kind of boundaries can be broken down a little bit, or does the entry into satellites into this space in the last few years change your views, for example? So on the standard side, is there any work underway that integrates these services a little bit better, such as the handoff to Wi-Fi indoors, for example, in building, or the way that satellite might integrate with mobile? So I don't know if anyone wants to take that. It was a bit of a kind of agnostic question to anyone that might want to chip in.
Yeah, I mean, I can take an attempt at it. What we see where satellite technology, when direct to device or direct to, is how you want to call it, is going to play a complementary role for addressing the coverage. Even within the latest advancements and, generation 2, generation 3 technology from many of the players that we see, I think the capacity is the main thing. You will not be able to deliver that much of a capacity and the user experience. And this is direct to device. Of course, if it is a fixed broadband with a separate receiver, and then it is a different one. But I think it's going to play a complementary role for sure, providing coverage in remote areas or making coverage affordable as compared to the terrestrial networks. And definitely in some of the geographies, and you were mentioning some earlier in your question, and I will add to that some other geographies, for example, in MEA and Africa, the availability of access is pretty limited, and of course, for a fixed connection, also satellite technologies are going to come and provide a coverage and adoption. So net positive, I would say, but is it going to replace? No ways. The terrestrial networks is going to complement, and we have to see how much. Of course, there is a cost and investment angle to it, which is coming down significantly. The costs are going up, but for next 10 years, we still see it playing a complementary role. So yeah, that's my view on it. Happy to listen to it. Yeah.
And just to pick up more generally about your question of sort of the accessorial nature of different services gaining access to spectrum. As you mentioned, I've been a regulator myself. It's the way of the world, effectively. Every party puts forward the maximum demand it can realistically justify in order to make the strongest case possible for its access to spectrum, which is entirely understandable. It's the rules of the game. It's how everyone plays it. It would be lovely if there were a game that were more collaborative and less adversarial, and I would very much welcome that, but I just don't see how we can get to that sort of a world from where we are at the moment.
Yeah, we can but hope, William. But Tom, I know I think we've got a few minutes left. I mean, I'll open it to the floor in a minute, but do you want anything to add on that point? Could services play a little bit nicer together is probably the summary.
Well, I think it's good for the ecosystem for the services to be better integrated. I think along the lines of the non-terrestrial networks, there is standards work that's going on in 3GPP to better allow those complementary services between non-terrestrial networks. In other words, the satellite burst services. Right now, they're sort of, they're sort of put together as opposed to more integrated, but there's still going to be, I think, limitations based on bandwidth and latency that are going to cause some challenges. So I do see it as complementary as we go forward. And what we'll try to do is continue to be, update our forecasts and be realistic about what the usage is, and we'll monitor the real, impacts of AI as we go over the next 5 to 10 years. So we'll see, because as Hemant showed in his forecast, there's a wide range of predictions of what might happen, but whether it's 18% or 27% CAGR, it's still a pretty big cumulative aggregate growth rate, and you're talking about a large base of mobile and wireless traffic that you're basing that off of. So I agree it might be slowing, but your volume is so large that we have to plan for this. And because it takes so long to get new spectrum bands into from the time they're identified to, sort of they're on our wish list to the time they're identified to the time that we can have an auction or make it available in some other coordination or sharing mechanism. We need to be working actively on that. So
yeah, thank you, Tom. I'm conscious of time. I don't know how we're doing for time, Lee. I've got
you've got about a minute and a half left.
Okay. Let me ask one quick answer. So PMSE is a user of low band UHF. This is wireless mics for special events, Tom, things like NFL and special events, live music. Each kind of generation, you've tended to see a pairing of low band with a higher frequency band. I mean, if the problem is capacity, is another low band allocation needed in your view? So any final thoughts on that?
So
how do you define low band? Because
sub 1 gig. So wireless mics are all over the world have lost 800 megahertz, 700, 600 in the States. If the problem is capacity, what's more low band going to do in terms of benefits for you?
There's probably less benefit in the low bands just because there's a lack of sufficient bandwidth in the low bands to be able to yield the kind of capacity needs. But clearly, low band is part of the sort of layer cake of low, mid, high band that are needed for 5G networks and beyond. But in terms of additional low bands, probably not our highest priority because it just doesn't provide enough bandwidth for mobile wireless. I can't speak to the needs for wireless microphones. Maybe someone else on the panel can.
So a quick thought from me, perhaps a more radical thought. I suspect that near all terrestrial broadcasting will get turned off in the next decade. The number of viewers is getting less and less, and it's just getting economically harder to justify doing it. So I think it will just go away because it becomes too expensive. And when it goes away, that liberates the remainder of the UHF band. And it strikes me that actually it would be perfectly sensible for there to be a solid dedicated chunk of that given to PMSE. So no longer sharing, but actually to have a certain amount of spectrum. We can debate exactly how many megahertz that is, but I think that will probably be the way I would go with PMSE in the future.
Okay, I think I'm going to draw it to a close there. Thank you very much. I mean, it's been a really thought-provoking conversation. I would just note that the next panel going on in WINForum is UK Ofcom and Canada's ICED to listen about Ofcom's 6 gigahertz sharing approach and ICED's local licensing approach. So with that, I think I'll encourage everyone to dial in and hear what they have to say. Thank you ever so much. It's been an absolute delight. A really privileged to hear you all speak. And Lee, if there's nothing else, I think we'll close up. So it's a minute over. Sorry about that, but it's been really enjoyable. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, everybody.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.
Sure.